All right, so we're diving deep into Philippians 2, 3-8 today.
Okay.
But we're going beyond, that surface level be humble stuff. I think a lot of our listeners already know the verse pretty well.
Right.
So we're bringing in some unique angles, maybe some sermon illustrations, how different pastors have approached this passage.
Yeah, some fresh inspiration for your ministry.
Exactly.
If you're preaching on this or teaching on this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we analyzed a couple of sermons, Embracing Grace, the Power of Servanthood and Unity,
Okay.
and Transforming Lives, Christ Formed Within Us.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how both of those sermons, they kind of take this idea of humility and turn it on its head a little bit.
Yeah.
What we think we know about it.
Absolutely. And they both offer, I think, some really unique angles for pastors and Bible study leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really jumped out to me is how both of them emphasize the importance of Jesus serving U.S. first.
Yeah.
As like the foundation of true service to others.
That's really intriguing. Yeah.
Which almost seems counterintuitive, right?
It does, doesn't it?
You would think that focusing on serving others would be like the starting point.
Right.
But they both really make this case that...
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever tried to help somebody who's just completely resistant?
Oh, yeah.
Who pushes away any assistance that you're offering?
Absolutely.
They can't really receive your service until their heart changes, right?
That's such a good point.
Yeah, and Embracing Grace uses this analogy, and it really resonated with me. It's like trying to fill a cup that's turned upside down.
Yeah.
You just can't do it until you turn the cup over.
Right.
And they suggest that it's the same with us and Jesus until we allow ourselves to be served by him, to truly receive his grace and love. Our attempts to serve others are going to be limited.
It's like we're trying to give away something that we haven't fully received ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't give what you don't have.
Yeah.
Transforming Lives takes kind of a different approach, I think, to this idea of being served by Jesus.
Okay.
They use this image of a yoke, that wooden harness that connects two oxen together.
Yeah, break that down a little bit more for me.
Sure. So a yoke, it's more than just a connection, right? It signifies this shared burden, this united effort, and the oxen literally move together, their strength is combined.
Right.
And the sermon argues that being yoked with Christ means allowing ourselves to be led by him, to learn from his example, to be shaped by his character.
So it's not just about accepting his service,
Right.
but about being so close to him that his way of being sort of rubs off on us.
Precisely. Yeah, and I think what's fascinating here is this yoke analogy really speaks to a deeper level of intimacy with Christ.
Okay.
It suggests this constant, ongoing connection where we're learning and growing alongside him.
And both sermons feature some pretty powerful stories, I thought, that really bring these concepts to life.
Yeah, for sure.
In Embracing Grace, there's this story about a woman named Vonnie who ministers to prisoners in Texas.
Talk about a challenging environment for practicing humility and service.
I know, right?
Wow.
But what's remarkable is that she's seeing incredible transformations happening within these prison walls.
Absolutely.
And she shares this one story about an Aryan Brotherhood leader and a Muslim leader who were once sworn enemies, finding common ground and serving each other through her ministry.
That's amazing. And, it makes you wonder if we connect that back to this idea of being served by Jesus first.
Wow.
What was it about Vonnie's approach that allowed these men to finally open their hearts?
It's such a good question. It suggests there's something about genuine humility, about offering service without judgment or expectation that can break down even the strongest barriers.
And I think it's fascinating to consider the historical context here as well.
Yeah.
Remember, Jesus' act of washing his disciples' feet was incredibly radical for his time.
It was.
Leaders just didn't behave that way.
Right. It completely flipped the power dynamic on its head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that historical context just adds another layer of depth, I think, to Vonnie's story. It highlights the power of choosing humility and service in a world that often values dominance and control.
Absolutely.
And speaking of radical examples of faith transforming lives, brings up a fascinating parallel with Acts 4:13.
Where even Peter and John's enemies can tell they'd been with Jesus.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that point, that spending time with Jesus should be visibly transformative.
Yeah.
Like our actions, our words, our very demeanor should reflect that inner change.
I love that point. It's not just about, feeling good inside.
Right.
But it's about a transformation that others can actually see and recognize.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of that idea from Embracing Grace about letting Jesus serve us first. Like, we can't truly serve others until we've experienced his service ourselves.
Exactly. It's a beautiful paradox, isn't it?
It is.
The more we allow ourselves to be served by Jesus, the more we are empowered to serve others.
Right.
It's this cycle of humility and grace.
So as pastors and Bible study leaders,
Yeah.
how do we actually apply these insights?
Yeah.
How do we go beyond simply teaching about Jesus and create opportunities for people to really encounter him personally?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it starts with recognizing that intimacy with Jesus is going to look different for everyone.
So maybe instead of prescribing this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to spiritual growth,
Right.
we need to help people discover their own unique pathways to connecting with Christ.
Absolutely. For some, it might be through prayer or worship. For others, it might be through acts of service or spending time in nature.
This makes me think back to that yoke analogy.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about being connected to Jesus in this theoretical sense,
Right.
but about allowing that connection to really impact our everyday lives.
Yeah. How does being yoked with Christ influence our decision-making, our relationships, our responses to challenges?
Exactly.
You know, it's about constantly asking ourselves, what would Jesus do? But not in a simplistic rule-following way.
Right.
It's about cultivating this deep, intuitive understanding of his character so that his way of being becomes our own.
And I think stories like Vani's can be so powerful in illustrating what that looks like in practice.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just an inspiring anecdote. It's a real-life example of how humility and service can transform even the hardest hearts.
And it reminds us, too, that transformation isn't always this dramatic overnight experience.
Right.
It's often a slow, steady process of allowing ourselves to be changed by God's grace.
Which brings us back to that historical context we touched on earlier. Remember, Christian was initially a derogatory term in Antioch.
Yes. It's a stark reminder that following Jesus has never been about fitting in. It's about standing out, about being different.
And maybe that difference is most evident in our humility.
Yeah.
And our willingness to serve others without seeking recognition or reward.
It's about embodying that countercultural message of Philippians 2:3-8 in a world that so often values power, wealth, and self-promotion.
So how do we help people embrace that difference today?
Yeah.
How do we encourage them to live out this radical message of humility and service?
I think it starts with creating a culture of humility within our churches and communities. A culture where people feel safe to admit their weaknesses, to ask for help, to serve one another without expecting anything in return.
And that requires us as leaders to model that humility ourselves.
Yes.
To be willing to get our hands dirty, to admit when we're wrong, to put the needs of others before our own.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about moving beyond those performative aspects of faith.
Right.
And getting to the heart of what it means to be a follower of Christ.
And that brings us right back to that core message of Philippians 2:3-8. It's not about following a set of rules
Right.
or trying to earn God's favor.
Right.
It's about allowing ourselves to be transformed by his love and grace.
It's about having the mind of Christ, which is a mind of humility, service, and self-sacrifice.
And that transformation should be evident in every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely.
It's not just about what we do on Sundays.
Right.
It's about how we treat our families, our coworkers, even the strangers we encounter on the street.
It's about reflecting the love of Christ in all that we do.
Yeah. And that's a challenge that I think every Christian is called to embrace.
Both sermons that we discussed today really emphasized intimacy with Jesus as the key to this transformation.
But what does that look like practically?
Yeah.
How can we as pastors and Bible study leaders encourage that intimacy in our communities?
That's the question we should all be wrestling with. What are the specific steps we can take to help people move beyond simply knowing about Jesus?
Right.
To actually being with him.
Maybe it starts with creating space for silence and reflection, for listening to that still small voice within.
Or perhaps it's about finding ways to integrate service into the fabric of our church life.
Yeah.
Not as an occasional event, but as an ongoing expression of our faith.
I love that.
You
Whatever the approach, I think the key is to help people discover that deep personal connection with Christ.
Yeah.
That goes beyond just intellectual understanding.
Because when we truly grasp the message of Philippians 2:3-8, it has the power to change our lives and the lives of those around us.
So as you prepare your next sermon or Bible study on this passage, I encourage you to keep diving deeper to explore those non-obvious insights and to create space for genuine transformation in your community.